So lawyers from our M&A, property, banking and tax teams work closely together on this transaction, which people in the media fondly refer to as the three-headed monster. It involved a controlled transaction and simultaneous disposals of a large portion of Healthscope's property assets to two overseas REITs. What distinguishes KWM is the consistency of the experience that clients see across our practice team and the way in which our teams operate seamlessly together to produce a great result for our clients. Most take-privates involve an acquisition by a bidder and subsequently a sale of some of the assets in the portfolio, whereas in this case we work closely with the target to pre-arrange the sale of the assets. The transaction also involved a simultaneous takeover and scheme of arrangement. This is unusual and in fact, to our knowledge, has only been done once before in this market, in 2011, in another transaction involving us and Brookfield. The structure chosen meant that the proceeds from the sale of the properties was effectively a form of funding, which meant that the amount that our client had to contribute by way of equity and other funding sources was reduced. In turn, the simultaneous scheme of arrangement and takeover meant that our client had optionality, because even if the scheme of arrangement is ultimately not approved by 75% of shareholders, the transaction will still proceed if a majority of shareholders sell into the takeover.
Brookfield decided in this process fairly early on, which was helpful, to go with bank debt financing rather than a term loan B, which I think you can see KKR used for MYOB, or a unitranche, which TPG used for Green Cross. But Brookfield decided that with this transaction, its complexity and the different sequencing, to go with bank debt, and that I think proved to be a very key decision, and it made everything a bit easier in the overall process. The whole transaction was very complex, as you know. We had to structure a financing package that could respond to both a scheme and a takeover. It had two different borrowers depending on which path you went down. There was different sequencing depending on the scheme or the takeover. And layered on top of that, it had to respond to the fact there were two propcos in the structure with a sale-leaseback. So I think the bank debt option was the right one for this transaction, and a shout out to the banks. They were great, they were very supportive. Brookfield managed to bring its strong global relationships with a big group of banks. We ended up with 7 who really, responded to the complexity. They were nimble. They coped with all the finessing and the constant finessing of the structure. We spent a lot of time with Brookfield really working up what the optimal funding mix was. And I think the difference in this transaction, apart from having both the usual debt equity split to fund the transaction, for this one, the sale-leaseback, the property sale-leaseback was such a key plank in the overall mix, and that contributed $2.4 billion to the overall funding mix. So making that propco sale-leaseback structure with both the propcos, we had MPT and Northwest, mixing them into the structure, making sure the sale-leaseback transaction interacted with the banks. There were intercreditor relationships we had to deal with. That just really added to the complexity. But again, full marks to Brookfield was able to, and the other commercial parties, the banks and MPT and Northwest, were able to put it all together in what is a very complex and finely tuned and sequenced funding mix. But it worked, and it was incredible in the end to have such a complex package come together like that.